Hello and welcome to Sean White's Solar and Energy Storage Podcast.
Today, our special guest is Greg Field, and Greg does all kinds of stuff. And instead of me explaining all kinds of stuff, I bet you Greg might know more about himself than even I do. So tell us about yourself, Greg.
Well, I started in renewables back in 2008 in Arizona when the Great Recession was right in the middle of, receding.
Arizona. Yeah, I heard that they have like an extra sun there or something, or it's really bright, something like that.
Yes, tons of sunlight. So really great area for solar. I actually got interested in solar before I even got into the industry back when I took a trip to Hawaii in 2006. Saw a lot of solar thermal, solar hot water out there. So I relocated from the Bay Area to Arizona back in 2006. Tried to get in the industry, in the solar industry, was not successful for a few years because I really didn't know anybody in the industry. And then ended up getting with a small company that turned out not to be a very reputable company, but responded to them in an online job forum that called monster.com back then.
Oh, yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Do they not have that anymore? It's just an energy drink, is it?
Yeah, I'm guessing that's the case now. But
Some taurine or whatever they throw in that
right.
caffeine.
So I was in 2008. Me and my girlfriend both worked at the same company. We got laid off, and so we had no income for months. And then I found this ad that said, if you want to earn between 12 and 15,000 part-time selling solar, contact me. So went to meet with a company. Turned out the company was not very ethical, but started in selling a
Yeah, we've heard of unethical solar salespeople, and
yeah.
a lot of the people that I know in the industry, we're working on taking them out.
Yeah, this is early in the industry though, so really I don't think anyone back then knew a lot about solar. So this company specialized in duct sealing and selling a small solar hot water system from Favco, who actually made solar pool equipment.
Oh, so it was just a hot water company.
Yeah, solar hot water and efficiency. So anyway, long story short, worked for them for a few months, found out we were basically trained to lie to people about a loan that could re-amortize that actually couldn't. We were selling on a monthly payment because back then that was the recession. Everybody was trying to save money. But that was my first job in solar. And from there, I just kind of started making industry contacts. Then I started working primarily with a local manufacturer here in Phoenix that actually built his own solar thermal system. So I continued in that space of solar hot water and energy efficiency upgrades with homes. And then in 2009 is when I started my career in photovoltaics. I met at a home show, a local vendor here that owned a solar company, started selling solar in 2009, 2010. We were over $6 a watt. So it was, the early days of Arizona solar. But anyway, since then, I basically worked in solar for a number of years. In 2017, one of our utilities here, we lost net metering. So that's when I became a realtor and started helping homeowners on the listing side, specializing in homes that had solar on them already to help clients get value in that space. And ever since then, been kind of a jack of all trades, working in real estate, energy, battery storage, more specifically, more recently, and then photovoltaics as well.
So those are some interesting topics, especially selling houses with solar on them. And it's very interesting that you're specializing in that too. I always get the question from people. They're like, I'm buying a house. It has solar on it. What should I do? And it's like, well, you got to find out if you're in some kind of lease or something like that. And a lot of times they are. And then the person selling the house wants them to take over the lease. And it might be some kind of terrible lease that your unethical ex-colleague put together or something like that. And I know that when I moved into a house about 3 or 4 years ago, it had solar on it. And we just told the people selling the house, oh, buy out that lease and then we'll take the house. And they didn't give us any trouble. But a lot of times people will just say, I'm not selling you the house unless you take that lease. So what do you recommend? Or I guess you just pretty much have to look at the contract. One of the things that I did notice too about that lease that the people bought out from the house that I moved into is when they bought out that lease, they got no deal for buying it out early. They had to pay like pretty much the whole price with interest over whatever it was, 10 or 20 years.
Yeah, the lease buyout is punitive, so you never come out ahead. It's just you're counting dollars lost as the seller. I just have a listing I just took on. Actually, I got it listed yesterday that has a lease on it. So the nuanced part of the discussion that I think realtors don't really know much about is the utility side of the lease. So as a realtor, we can look at the lease and say, okay, this has a 2.9% escalator every year. So we can say, here's our payment now, here's our payment in 5 years, 10 years. But what this lease has that is actually, I think, equitable in terms of like value to the buyer side, this lease was done in 2017, a month before APS switched off net metering. So this particular home has grandfathered remaining 15, 20, 16 years left of the net metering agreement. They get a full 1-for-1 trade on power sold back. So I'll actually get this lease transferred even in today's market because even with a small increase, 2.9% a year, there's tremendous value in Arizona because in today's market, if you do solar today in Arizona, you get instead of net metering, which is 1-for-1, you get net billing. And with APS, you get less than, right around 6 cents per kilowatt hour, which is nothing. So coupled with the fact that we're now moving into an era next year with no tax credit, this home actually has tremendous advantage. It's in a retirement area, so there's going to be a retiree with fixed income, assuming this lease. I'll be able to put value to the lease, and most realtors wouldn't, frankly. And most buyers would say, well, buy it out because they don't understand value either. So I think that's why I became a listing agent, is to understand with 18 years of solar renewable experience, I know the nuance between the lease agreement, the vendors that offer and service the lease for transfer, as well as the utility agreements. When you know all that complex landscape, you can see if there's value, and then you can present that value to the buyer's agent, get them educated, and get the lease transferred.
A lot of times when people are buying solar, one of their big reasons for not buying solar is that they might move someday. And I was wondering if anybody ever had any luck telling them like, well, I'm not going to buy the solar system unless you give me a good way out, where it's not punitive for getting out early, because any contract is negotiable. I wonder if anybody has ever had any luck with that.
Not to my knowledge.
Uh-huh.
So generally the finance company and many of these lease companies that were originally the originators of that lease, some of them have gone out of business. Sonova, SunPower. So now you're dealing through a servicing company that could give two, what's about what you think. So
Well, that would be too late. But like
yeah,
at the time of buying the solar system or leasing the solar system,
yeah.
that would be the time to see if they could change the contract so it wasn't punitive for getting out early if you sell the house.
I would tell you that you'd have a 0% chance of that happening. So the lease companies basically are in a take it or leave it position. And back then there was value because the utility had a buyback rate that made tremendous sense. Lease companies are not negotiable. So this is not like you're going to, maybe a different type of retail where you can negotiate. The lease side, they're firm. This is our agreement. They don't modify contracts for anybody. You wouldn't be able to negotiate that.
I got an idea, Greg.
Yeah.
Let's make a lease company, you and I, where it's not punitive to get out early.
Yeah.
And then everybody will go through our lease company. And I think it would be a good business proposition because there's so many people out there that would benefit from that. And there's so many people out there that are not getting solar because they don't want to have a lease that will work against them selling their house.
So what's interesting, and this is a new evolution that's happening in solar. So the residential credit expires at the end of the year because of the big, beautiful bill.
That's the residential credit where the person owns their own solar system. Because if a
Correct.
corporation owns it, they have a lot more rights than people. People are small. Corporations are big and powerful and
Yes,
beautiful. That's why they call it the big, beautiful bill, because
exactly.
corporations are so beautiful.
Yeah, so the BBB gave a fair amount of advantage to the corporate side. So the corporate tax credit, now you can depreciate in 1 year, not 5 years. There's also energy communities. There's some other additional benefits to that corporation. So what's interesting is we're actually in conversations in Arizona with this company called Participate Energy. What we're looking at with them now is a new model where it is a lease, but it's not a traditional lease, what we call third party owned. What this is now the homeowner can lease the equipment for no cost. So 25-year agreement, no cost. They would get the tax credit, the 30% off the top. They don't have to pay that part like they do in a traditional lease. The lease company takes the tax credit, depreciation, all the advantages, and they don't really pass much of a benefit. That's why lease has a bad name. This lease, though, I think is a really nice consumer product because now you get 30% off. So you're paying 70% of your purchase costs. You're leasing for no cost. You're using the commercial credit. The commercial credits and the vendor participates getting other advantages on the back end. But the nice thing from the homeowner side, they're getting an instant 30% off their purchase price. And within 6 years, they can talk to participate. They do an inquiry and negotiate essentially a low or no cost buyout where they've had the advantage of the credit up front. And now in 6 years, they can potentially own the system. This is a new model that's come out in the last few weeks that I think is going to be very successful. It blends the lease advantage, but also gives the real advantage to the client, which was never the case in traditional leasing.
Wow. Wow, that sounds really important. And it sounds so important that I want to hear it again, like maybe just from a little bit of a different angle. So it's a new thing that just came out.
Yep.
It's a lease, but the person who's getting the lease, the homeowner, they get that 30% off right off the bat.
Correct.
And then they can buy out early without a
Yes.
penalty.
Without a penalty.
I thought you just said there's a 0% chance of that. Now it can happen. That was the 0% chance. That was 2 weeks ago or what?
Yeah, I know. Well, and consider this is an evolving landscape because of the big, beautiful bill. Like the finance companies, and I happen to know this person who's part of this group who's, Participate Energy. They're very ethical. They're doing it the right way. And they're really trying to find a win-win versus what the traditional lease model was.
That sounds like the way that it always should have been.
Yeah.
Especially right now, because that you can pretty much model a lease the way that you want to. And so far, the people that have been modeling these leases are doing it not to benefit the consumer.
Correct.
And that's one reason why there's a lot of upset people out there and people that can't get out of their leases. And so what did you say it was called? Participate Energy? Is that
Participate Energy is the lender, and we're in the final stage of approval as a vendor here in Phoenix. We should have the product available next week. They'll have an option. So what they're calling it, and they're probably going to change the name, they're calling this a synthetic cash option because you really do have a preserved path to ownership, which is not what you have in a traditional third-party owned lease. So technically you are leasing the equipment for a minimum of 6 years, which allows Participate to take the tax benefits, the depreciation, other benefits they get in the first 6 years. I think 6 years is a minimum hold required before they can possibly release the equipment to you. But the nice thing is this allows us the best of both worlds in my mind, because now my client, the challenge we always had in solar was the tax credit was real, but it was always something you had to file for the following year. It never helped you up front. So the actual out-of-pocket, cost was always more punitive to my client. This allows you to use it instead of a traditional tax credit waiting a year to file. Now it's essentially more of like a rebate, if you will, because now it's coming right off the top to my homeowner. So they get the benefit right away, which really helps them to lessen the financial burden of either paying out of pocket or borrowing on that product.
So my question is, why didn't somebody come up with this 10 years ago?
I think, to be candid, and I'm getting in the mind of lenders here, but frankly, I think the lenders are very greedy. So I think they saw the opportunity to utilize the tax credit and other benefits on their own and make more money. And I think most Americans would agree that most lenders are too greedy, and that's probably the case here. I would tell you the traditional lease did not reflect the full benefit of all the benefits they see as a commercial entity, from depreciation, the credit, everything else. The leases were not structured very fair. I will go back in time though. So I was a master dealer for a company called SunPower here in Phoenix. SunPower, going back to 2011, 2012, the first generation lease they came out with was extremely consumer friendly. Very low cost energy, no escalator, $600 buyout in 6 years. That was a phenomenal product. Once the lenders, I think, understood how much money they could make if they were more greedy, that's when leases got bad. That was your second and third generation leases. The first gen lease was amazing, but we saw that quickly change within a year. SunPower stopped offering that lease, and then it moved to a much higher cost lease for my clients.
Yeah, it just seems to me like even though lenders are greedy, that there should have been one lender out there going, I want to get more business. I'm going to make something better for the consumer, and everybody would do it. Another thing that I was thinking about too is when they decided to get rid of the tax credits for people that own their own system as a person rather than a corporation, that probably somebody would come up with something for those people that would have otherwise just purchased the systems themselves. And that sounds like maybe that's what this is.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I am personally not a fan of the big, beautiful bill for many reasons, but
then why did you say beautiful? Why didn't you say bad, huh? Big
big
bad bill. Yeah.
Yes. I'm not a fan in many ways, but at the end of the day, I think what it did force is our industry. And I think this is sometimes the silver lining to anything that happens like this in any industry. It forced us to evolve. And I think what happened is some of the more ethical players, which is, I think, Participate Energy, they were looking as a lender to put together a fund where it truly was a win-win for the consumer and for them. And they're being exceptionally fair to every aspect. So in this case, the installer gets the 100% cost. So they get 30%, they get 70% from the client, the installer, and they get the additional 30% back over the inspection and permission to operate in milestones. So the installer gets 100%, they get made whole. The consumer gets 70% cost, not 100%. So they get an advantage right away. And then the lease, in this case, the lease company Participate also gets the wins on the back end. So this is as much of a win-win scenario that I've seen in solar, frankly.
And this would also be probably really good for somebody that's really good at taxes and deductions that couldn't take advantage of that 30% tax credit.
Yes. What this really opens up in my mind is the traditional lease clientele that we had, that we basically just had a lease option for, were the retirees. They didn't have tax liability. So we had to go to them and say, look, this is what you have. It's a lease. And it wasn't great. This opens up a ownership option for retirees that was not there before. Because again, effectively, we're taking this from a tax credit to more of a rebate that anyone can utilize because now the commercial side's utilizing it on the back end, but the client's getting the benefit right up front.
Great, great. So how can people take advantage of this? I know that they can call you if they're in the Phoenix area or
Yeah.
Arizona, but how about other people?
So Participate Energy, again, this is a very, very new program. So Participate's adding vendors, installers all across the country that are going to be able to offer this option. I would suggest going to Participate Energy website in the next few weeks. Likely you'll see a Participate or installing dealer list there that you can go to and find for your local area.
And why would anybody not offer this to their customers? Is there only a certain amount of people per area, or it just seems like something that would be obvious?
Yeah, I think so. From Participate's perspective, I think they're going to have a certain amount of vendors. They're not going to sign up every installer. They're going after some of the larger installers for this fund. Why would somebody do something else? Because there'll be a number of installers that don't have this option. So they'll just do a traditional TPO or lease model through a bank. That'll still exist next year, by the way. So that model will still be out there. I think when you look at the merits of this program versus a traditional lease, and for example, I offer you this as a homeowner, and then you look at a lease, I can't imagine there's a lot of appetite on the homeowner side. When they compare the two, they're going to say, okay, there's a lot more value in me taking advantage of this synthetic cash option versus going through a traditional lease company. But the lease companies will be out there. I think what you're going to find, and this is always the case, and you know this, I'm sure already, where do you find traditional lease and where will you find it next year? It'll be in the door knocker model because those are knockers that go out to neighborhoods. They find homeowners that they're not really savvy in terms of solar at all. And they kind of capitalize on that. They offer them a lease. The homeowners don't shop. Unfortunately, that's an uneducated homeowner, which is not the clientele I work with. But that's where you're going to see a lot of traditional lease models still be out there in large numbers next year.
A lot of people think that the door knockers are just going to end up going out of business, but I guess still we do have the tax credit. But once the tax credit's gone, they'll probably be the first ones to take the hit.
I guess. I mean, right now, from a door knocker perspective, it's changing your elevator pitch from, doing a loan pitch maybe at the door to a lease pitch, which they'll have no problem doing that next year. I don't see a lot of attrition on the door knocker side. I think, unfortunately, what's going to happen is a lot of the smaller installers that focused on purchase as kind of their clientele base, some of those will leave the industry, unfortunately. The door knockers, I liken them to cockroaches. They're going to still be around. I don't see them leaving for the next few years. I think once we get to 27, the commercial credit for solar goes away. That's where we'll probably see some attrition on the door knock side. But door knockers, if they can charge a large commission, which they still can on the lease model, they'll
Mhm.
still be out there next year.
Yeah, or after 2027, when you can't do the tax credit at all, unless something changes, which I still think there's a good chance that at the last minute, they'll be like, oh, we're going to extend this. But if they don't extend it, then that'll be it for those poor door knockers.
I know, and that's the group that my heart goes out to because I really
Uh-huh.
want them to survive making
Uh-huh.
$10,000 commissions. Those poor guys. I'd hate
Uh-huh.
for them to leave the industry, really. I'm being sarcastic. Honestly, in 18 years of solar, they've done so much damage on the PR side to what makes an ethical rep like myself and sales teams that sell it the right way. they undermine us a lot with really bad talking points, portraying the leftover utility bill as almost zero, which is not the case. Like they do a lot of bad things in this industry. So obviously, I think all of us would like to see them leave. But again, with the commercial credit being there next year, I don't see that happening for a few years. But ultimately, there will be a pare down in our industry, which will be a welcomed thing.
Great, great. Yeah, those darn door knockers ruin it for everyone else.
They do. I will say there's a few door knocking teams that are ethical. I know a company here in the Valley, Sun Solar Solutions. The owner, Val, is very ethical. There are some guys out there doing it the right way. It's just a lot of the bad ones. Those are the ones you hear about. Those are the headlines. Those are the media stories you see.
Like they literally stick their foot in the door, something like that.
Yeah, yeah. Although I will say Arizona is very saturated on door knock. So, and that coupled with all the deadline selling that happened here, where everyone's saying, hey, solar's out of business next year. I think the market's going to be soft even for door knockers next year, going into probably the middle of the year. So I think that's going to be the challenge for all vendors next year, including the one I work with, is trying to find lead generation for the next 6 months once we get past the deadline.
We interrupt you for a very important announcement. Sean White's Solar and Energy Storage Podcast has been brought to you by Sean White's Solar and Energy Storage Podcast. That's right, Sean White is sponsoring his own podcast, and he wants to remind you to go check out some of his classes. You can go to SolarSEAN, that's Solar, SEAN.com, and then click on the links to check out his classes. You can check out his heat spring classes, and you can also hire him to teach classes for you, like at your company, something like that. Now back to the show.
So you are in Arizona, and my daughter is in Scottsdale, and I was looking at her electric bill, and the energy cost was super low, and she had kind of high demand charges. Is that what you see over there?
Yeah, in fact, so I came up with I mean, it's not my concept, but I talked to Tesla. I have some good friends at Tesla. I started using battery only as a solution that's grid charged for that demand plan, which is what you're describing. So APS SRP have a demand plan where they use a multiplier to a fee. They look at your highest half hour or 1 hour of peak usage for the month, and then they multiply that. Like on APS, that's the multiplier for 1 hour. Your worst peak hour is used against a $20 fee. That can drive that fee to over $100 to $200 in the summer. So what I started doing surgically is finding out.
So you said that's a half an hour that costs $200.
Well, that's SRP. That's the other utility. Your daughter is an APS. That's an hour multiplier. But what I started realizing is we didn't have to use solar to get after that. So I started using Tesla Powerwall 3 to grid charge on that demand plan. So off peak on that plan, you're only paying a little less than 6 cents per kilowatt hour. Battery can charge off the grid from the grid within 2.5 hours, and then it can export its power and really minimize your multiplier, where now you're paying, $50, $60 for that fee versus hundreds. And the battery's doing that by just exporting during peak hours and then charging during off peak. That's been a really good solution for APS clients like your daughter.
Okay, so storage without solar, and
Yes.
that works really well for people that have very high demand charges. And it would have to be in a place that would let you do that. I know that in some places, they don't let you charge your battery from the grid in some cases.
Yeah. So that's going to be dependent on the utility. But here in Arizona, both utilities, the largest ones in APS, SRP in the Valley, they both allow us to do grid charge solutions. So for the last year, I've actually been on a couple of media stories, local media here, focusing on why the grid charge battery is a great solution. In Arizona, we have a large issue happening here where there's a lot of data centers getting built, specifically that are high demand during peak. What's happening is our peak hours are moving later into the evening, which solar has no benefit for, and those demand charges are becoming exponentially more expensive. So I think from the homeowner perspective, what I found on battery only, it's got more appetite. Most homeowners are very excited about doing a battery. There's no conduit. There's not 50 roof penetrations. They're not dealing with the HOA. So I found the battery only solution is almost universal appeal versus going in with solar. So I've been a proponent of that for the last year and had a lot of success with homeowners, specifically like your daughter, who says, okay, I want to do something that offset the demand, but I don't want to do solar. So that's where I'm finding a lot of appetite from homeowners right now in the Valley.
Great. And are you seeing a lot of energy management systems and things like that too? Because I'm assuming that a lot of people like my daughter have pool pumps and stuff like that. They just don't know what they're doing. And then the air conditioner and the pool pump turns on all at once and you're charging your car And if people were just more educated about that, that would help too. But then you have like a whole month to deal with, and all it takes is one time. And,
Yeah,
it's like maybe there should be like something on your wall, or like your phone sends you a message like, hey, you already blew it for this month. Don't
yeah.
worry about it for the rest of the month, or,
We have load controllers we can use that will basically manage your loads to make sure you're not combining high loads together to minimize demand. The challenge in Arizona is the peak hours are late afternoon, 4 to 7 with APS. That's the hottest time of the day. So when we put a load control in a house, yes, it helps to negate some of the demand fee. But what ends up happening is you get a very unhappy homeowner who's sweating in their house.
hmm
So that's why I think the battery is such a better solution because
hmm
now I'm not asking you to make a lifestyle concession and you're still seeing significant savings off the utility rate.
or even better yet, do both at once.
Yeah, and that's what I think Tesla is moving towards is integrating a load controller solution in the battery where the battery can start to do some of that on its own. That'll be your next few generations of battery. I think we'll have that. I think we're moving towards that. That's kind of why I've always been a fan of the last few years working more in the dynamic energy management space versus just solar. Solar, unfortunately, has negated some of the value we used to see in solar has gone away in Arizona because the net billing buyback is so low, it's wholesale. And as I said, the peak hours are moving later, so we can't do as much against solar shuts off too early. So that's part of why I'm looking at battery storage as kind of the next evolution of where we're seeing the residential homeowner needing to be met well on the infrastructure side to get the solution against the utility rate design.
So it looks like I'm going to have to change the name of my podcast now to, instead of my solar and energy storage podcast, it'll have to be the energy storage and solar podcast. Seems like that's the way things are going.
It's where utilities are going, and I will tell you the energy consultants that are not designing to rate plan are doing a disservice to their client. I still see many reps here that are selling large solar systems that are oversized that are not going to be very effective against rate design at all.
Well, they need to just take my classes. They could go to solarsean.com and then put /PVA for your PV associate or PVTS for PV technical sales. And that's the way to get smart so you don't rip off all your customers that way. So,
Yeah, great suggestion. I think the more energy consultants that can learn about storage and rate design, the better they're going to be at their job.
mhm. Yeah, it does seem like a lot of these people don't really understand. I remember some years ago, at least 10 years ago, there was this company that was doing like cold calling a lot of times. And they hired me to come down and train them. And it
Mhm.
was just like seeing the things that they did and what they would tell people, and they didn't know what they were talking about. They'd be telling people they're going to give them rebates, and there's no rebates. And, they were just like coaching them how to lie. So,
Yeah, yeah. No, and that's the thing. I think we've seen a lot of that in the industry. So,
mhm.
we're not a heavily regulated industry. I'm not necessarily advocating for heavy regulation, but I think we've all seen enough bad players to know the industry needs to be cleaned up. Silver lining to this credit ending, there will be some of that happening just through attrition,
Mhm.
but I think the industry itself needs to get more mature and understand we're really important to the client and making sure we're doing a great service. So part of our job is to be better at rate design, utility, knowing rate plans, knowing rate structure, and understanding, is this a client that needs solar? I've been this year I've told clients because of roof or shade, battery only is your right solution. I don't need to add solar to this. So part of our job is to figure out what makes the most sense for that client, for that house versus just going out and making decisions on your commission. I tell most homeowners the reason most reps want to sell you a large solar system and not a battery only solution, they don't make much on a battery only solution, but they make a lot on a solar solution. So part of that is making those decisions more ethically on the rep side.
Great, great. Okay. Let's see. Is there anything else that you want to talk about? I know you do a lot of different things besides what we've already talked about.
I think it's just like we kind of the themes we've already touched on, which is we're in a very dynamic landscape in renewables right now. It's a challenging time. I think a lot of people are very concerned about where the industry next year is. I think things like synthetic cash with Participate are going to be a great solution, but we're still going to be in an industry that's trying to figure its way because there's been a lot of negative headlines this year about solar. Unfortunately, the administration has been very anti-renewable. So I think part of our job is the better we become at being ambassadors to this industry, finding more ethical ways to represent what we do, the better path we're going to forge forward. Because we are seeing a lot of headwinds right now with, supply chain, inflation, you name it. So I've been in the coaster for about 17 plus years. This has been one of the most challenging years, but it's also been one that's forced me to evolve to become a better sales rep. So I think that's the message I would have to any energy consultant out there. The good ones will not just survive, but thrive. The bad ones should leave the industry, and hopefully that'll happen in the next few years.
Yeah, one of the things that I'm thinking about too, what's going on is they get rid of that tax credit, but there's economics. There is supply and demand. And
Yeah.
solar and storage and wind and all renewables, they're by far the least expensive form of electricity. So if they're not going to get the tax credit anymore, what's going to happen? The price of electricity is going to go up. It's not going to put us out of business. It's just going to make people pay more for electricity, which they actually were paying for anyway, because when there's a tax credit, the money's coming from some other place. They have to
Yeah.
tax something else. And so we're going to all survive. People are going to have higher electric rates.
I think you're right, and I think that we'll see that effect. We're seeing it in Arizona. Our utilities have just now asked for a 14% increase. They're in the process of starting a rate case, APS. So I think we're seeing a lot of that. I think you're right. What we're seeing on the grid side with demand, especially from data centers, we're going to see more of that. We're going to see more power disruptions, higher prices. I think the tax credit's going to show a lot of people that renewables have a place in this, and it's the most scalable, fastest form of energy to add to the grid. The grid right now is under a lot of strain, needs more power supply, not less. That's why I think the BBB is a wrong-headed legislation. But I think you're right. I think in the next few years, consumers are going to find out they need renewables, and I think that's where we're going to find a marriage. I'm hoping in that same process that energy consultants can find better ways to become better stewards of, representing that process to homeowners ethically and finding the best solutions. Because the more we do that as an industry, the more people are going to recognize, because in Arizona there's a bad name with solar right now because there's just so much bad PR out there. I'm hoping that changes in the next few years with all those rate increases and better energy consultants meeting that demand.
Yeah, and probably what else is going to happen and where the money comes from is they just print it. They turn on the money printer, and that means there's more dollars out there and they can get more government programs and things like that, which makes there more money out there in the system, which is essentially a way of taxing consumers because
Yes.
our money is not worth as much.
Yes. Yeah. Agreed. So I think all those things are going to combine to a landscape that's going to, change in the next few years, but hopefully get better is my hope.
Okay, great. Well, thanks so much, Greg Field, Solar Home Realtor, and want to say a couple more things before we take off here.
Oh, I'm good. I think we've touched on everything that, is important to me.
Okay, and we'll put your LinkedIn in the show notes. And thanks everybody for listening to Shawn White's Solar and Energy Storage Podcast, where you can learn about solar and storage, or let me turn that around. You can learn about storage and solar. You could be like Greg Field and actually install storage without solar. What a concept. And you can also go to SolarSEAN, that's SolarSEAN.com. Get yourself NABCEP certified and make sure that your job is the most secure that it's ever been in your life with one of those NABCEP certifications.